Awesome. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Tahia Islam, and I'm a part of the education team here at the People's Forum. We're a cultural center and political education space in Midtown New York City to build working class internationalist movements. You can actually come visit us again now. We're back open for the summer every Tuesday to Saturday, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. We have a cafe, bookstore, co-working space, so come through. So thank you so much for joining us today for our first set of virtual programming for World Environment Day. Our international vision for the day is as follows. On World Environment Day, we fight for the defense of all forms of life on our planet. We condemn the predatory actions of corporations that do not care about the consequences in their search for profit and appropriation of natural resources. We know solution is in the rebuilding of the relationship between human beings and nature, where life, collective well-being, and ecological rhythms, not greed and profit, guide the actions of nations and people. It is a solution focused on agroecological production of food, the democratization of the access to land through agrarian reform, the protection and care of common goods, such as water, biodiversity, and land, and the transition to an energy model that responds to the real needs of the working class with social and environmental justice, overcoming patriarchy and racism. Putting a stop to capitalist barbarism is a central task of our time. We need to put an end to the domination of capital over life in order to create a world that is just, egalitarian, and vibrant so that we can all live well and in peace. So with that, I am very excited today to have Amy Kichis, organizer of Veggie Mijas today for a teach-in on grassroots food justice organizing. Veggie Mijas is a woman of color, trans folks of color, gender non-conforming collective for folks that are plant-based or are interested in a plant-based lifestyle that have marginalized identities and or experiences with food insecurity and food apartheid. They recognize that food injustice comes from climate change, worker exploitation, food insecurity, classism, sexism, and racism. So before I go in further into who they are, I'm going to pass it over to Amy. I'm very excited to have her here with us today on this incredible collective that they've built across the nation and now internationally. So over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Tahia. I'm so excited to be here and be in conversation with you. I think this is going to be really amazing. So thank you for having me. And to first introduce myself, my name is Amy, and I'm from Jackson Heights, Queens, New York, and I'm currently in DC. I'm getting my master's in ethics, peace, and human rights, studying global environmental justice. So I can't wait to go back to New York and, get started back into my roots again. Sorry, my dog is barking. All right, so to get started, some of our history. So Veggie Mijas started first in the summer of 2017, and it started as an Instagram page where I just wanted to collect recipes for college students, because when I was in college, I ate really poorly. I didn't know what veganism was in the first place. So when I started, it was just kind of in the air, and I really wanted to collect more plant-based recipes. However, after I got out of college, I started realizing that I wanted to collect more recipes from every other person, not just that's in college or like going through that phase, but in general, just Latinx folks, Black and Brown folks that wanted to collect also and see recipes that were plant-based and for traditional and their ancestral recipes. So I started collecting not only these recipes, but I started creating like a spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, I had like their cities, their gender, their sexuality, all of this information while not knowing really what to do with that information. I started then seeing a list of like around 60 people that were in the New York City list. And they all wanted to get together and hang out. And we had our first event in New York City. It was literally organized by people I did not know. People were like, I want to have this event. I want to talk about plant-based issues, food justice, environmental justice. Like, we need to have the space for it. And this girl, Annalisa, she opened her door and she welcomed all of these people. And when I walked in, it was about 35 people or more. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't even know it was my event. They didn't know who I was. Like, it was literally just from a post on Instagram that this collective was going to be a thing. After that photo went out in the air, a lot of other cities and organizers wanted to do the same thing. And it started with Oakland, LA, and Chicago. And now it blew up into a whole collective. So when I started out, I didn't know that I was starting out a collective. It kind of just grew organically, just like honestly everything grew organically in my life. I think that when I went to college, I went to be a medical examiner, and I realized that I didn't want to go to med school, and I followed my other passion, which was women's and gender studies. And being first generation Latina, my parents were like, you're not going to be a doctor, like what's going on? And I was like, no, I'm going to do women's and gender studies. And my dad, like, he went so fast on Google to see what I can do with that major. And he realized that I can do a lot. So then, when I started becoming, evolving my feminist studies, my friend who's Dominican, she was like, Amy, if you're a feminist, you should be vegan. And I was like, what is vegan? Like, what is that? And then I actually read the book Sister Vegan. And if you don't know Sister Vegan, it's a book written by Dr. Abreece Harper, and she speaks about Black women and the food insecurities in their lives and how their identities intersect with food. And that book, honestly, it just clicked for me. It clicked everything, my life, my experiences with food in Jackson Heights, etc. Currently, I know that Jackson Heights has like a lot of different foods, but I live near where the airport is, so a little bit off. And around there's like nothing. There's like Popeyes, Taco Bell, like there's just like no options. So my dad and I, we would go to, we would go more towards Northern and 82nd, like Roosevelt, to get all the fruits and stuff. And when we went to go get some fruits from this food stand, the man from the food stand gave us some fruits. We went back home and we opened the bag and we realized that the fruits were rotten, or that they have gone bad. And we went back and we were like, why did you give this to us? They were like, oh, like I'm trying to sell them. Like, let me go back home. Let me go get to the van and like get you fresh fruits. And he did. And I think like that's when it really sparked that, it was a problem that was much bigger than him. It was a problem about food apartheid in our neighborhoods, a conversation about food in our neighborhoods that really, wasn't truly happening. And there wasn't a lot of movement. And why? That's because we have other things to worry about, right? Like literally just surviving on so many other issues than fighting for like plant-based issues. But I think it all intersects, right? And I will talk about that more throughout the presentation. But yeah, it happened really organically. And our mission now, and has always been, is to share a sacred space for folks of color to talk about their plant-based lifestyles and how that intersects with their identities, focusing on sharing the space and learning ancestral practices through foods, providing access to information for our community, whether that's through digital resources or physically giving them the resources out in the streets. So Veggie Mijas started with just me, just me alone with my phone. And now we have a whole team. So we have a leadership team, an education team, a creative team, organizers. And, we have our data specialists. Now we have, under Stefania, we have a whole data team. Kat, who's our recruitment director. We have coordinators that manage the organizers. And when I say manage, it's not like telling them what to do, but more like helping them out, since they have been having so much experience as organizers themselves, kind of giving out and branching out that education. And we also have a finance director as well. And this is our new kind of addition. We have our education team, Giselle and Anna, who are working together to create curriculums for young students and adults. I think that one of the things that I'm so excited about our education program is that I try to really apply my personal experience with how I have seen food apartheid in our communities in order to kind of, add that into the curriculums because personal experiences are so important. And something that I realized is that my parents, they work a lot of hours, especially my dad, and they usually don't have time to like go grocery shopping in like a weekend, or like, when you see farmers markets and you see all the families together, like it's so cute. I wish I had that growing up, but I didn't. We would go late at night, super late at night, to go grocery shopping really quick and then go home, right, for the next day. And something that the education team wants to, build is kind of having these quick quick curriculums or quick teach-ins about what can you make with fruits or vegetables at a supermarkets, and kind of partner up with them to see how we can bring food justice and food education to the communities instead of having like whole separate events for them, right? Because you need to meet people where they're at. So that's something that they're working on, and they're working on so many other things along that that's like super creative and awesome. We have our creative team that works with our merch and creating writing for our website and all that stuff, and they do research on international things that are happening in the world, and also locally in their communities they write about that as well. And now we have 14 active chapters. So we're in New York City, LA, Dallas, Philly, Chicago, Houston, New Orleans, Austin, Orlando, Denver, Oakland, Seattle, DC, and we're also now in India. She's in Mumbai. Her name is Sonal Ved, and she's incredible. And she's currently in Mumbai, but she will be traveling throughout India in order to have different kinds of events and teach-ins and stuff like that. So we're really excited. When we're talking about international chapters within Veggie Mijas, the mission stays the same, right? It gets tailored to what the community needs and what the organizer thinks is necessary, but overall it's still the same goal, whether that is food justice or farm worker justice, land justice, et cetera, et cetera. Every chapter has like their own mission statement, which you can find on the website, because it's so important that every city and every organizer knows what's up, right? Like, for example, when we had a Miami chapter, they focused a lot on beaches because that was what was most important for them. And for their community. So there was like a bunch of beach cleanups and all of that. And versus like New York, we don't have that many beaches. So like it would be a different mission for them. So leaning into that, some of our events and workshops has been having a sip and swap for fashion, right? And for ethic anti-fashion movements, or giving out food to houseless folks late at night, with some self-care packages, meaning like blankets or whatever they need, packages in that, having beach cleanups, doing herb workshops, to kind of connect back again to our ancestral practices. So we have a bunch of events that are very educational, and then we also have events that are also fun, right? Like potlucks and go visiting farm sanctuaries and all of that. I think that radical joy is so important within Veggie Mijas because there hasn't been a space like this before where people of color get together to talk about our plant-based lifestyles and food justice and environmental justice. And then second, we have a lot of workshops with the youth to teach them what veganism is. And we move kind of in a spectrum of how does food, relate to you? What are your food options around, your block? How does food affect you in general? And what are you already eating that's vegan, in order to, don't teach them something like so new, so rare, but like knowing that, it's already in their household. So it's really important to teach kids, their options and the reality of the world, and how they can be a part of that change. And then talking about food justice, Veggie Mijas also has recently launched a Chicago community fridge, and they had an amazing launch. It was so incredible. A bunch of vendors came out. A lot of folks came out to paint, and specifically you can find all of the folks that are credited on our Instagram that did the paintings, that, you know, did the shelter for the food, for the fridge. It was honestly just a team effort. And, you know, I would get together with the Chicago group to talk about finances and projected budgets. Like it was all a team effort, right? And beyond the Chicago community fridge, you know, LA was the one that actually started the community fridges in their city. And they have launched 2 community fridges. It has been over a year now, and it's still going super incredible. They have even extended the community fridge to do week drop-ins during the weekends, where they stand outside in different various parts and they give out food to the community. And it basically looks like in the photo right there that you can see, they have bags and it's filled with plant-based groceries. And because they have launched that, they gave an enormous amount of feedback, what is helpful, what is not helpful to Chicago. And that has just been super incredible and successful for them, because now that they have someone to look up to, right? Someone to like go and get that advice from. And that's so important in our movement, that everything is just together, even though we're in different parts of the city. And then also, we also do a lot of community gardening. Philadelphia now has a lot. I know that Austin also has been having a lot of events with community gardening, and also in New York, we've had some gardening events. I think that, you know, when we look at community garden, we're also thinking about how to teach people food production and like how to create like their own foods, like not relying on corporations, but relying on themselves and their community. We're also looking at, you know, people, sometimes they get lost with the land through like migration or any other things that we have seen literally when we have been working at the community garden. So like, for example, a moment that I think of is like when we were in the gardens, there was a lot of moments where we saw the community interacting with us while we were gardening. And, you know, people were like, oh my gosh, I used to grow things in my home country. Like I can grow some here. Like I didn't even know there was a garden here. I lived 2 blocks away. And we would see like mothers coming in with their children and their children picking up basil and mint and asking like, what is this? And it was just, it's such an interacting moment that it's so much more than just gardening, but also connecting the community and letting them know that there's a garden here, right? Because most places, even if there's a garden there, people don't even know about it because it's barely touched, or, you know, they just need more volunteers. So we advocate for people to volunteer at their local community garden because it's so important. And then lastly, you know, we've also worked in projects like Casa Verde, which is a vegan cookbook that we have created with 10 recipes. And it was super short. It was one of the first projects that Veggie Mijas has done. And it was one of the first also plant-based recipes that was made only by women of color. We often see a lot of vegan books that are made by white people doing freaking tacos or whatever they think that they're doing. And, you know, taking what is our culture and like veganizing it, for the purpose of doing their vegan books. But this is the first people of color, women of color vegan book that we have created with our own cultures. And it has been so sacred to us. It sold out like 3 times. And the first time we gave over 100 copies to educators throughout different cities of the US so they can use the Casa Verde through their education programs and for their kids and students as well. And then lastly, if you want to join Veggie Mijas, you can join as a member. And if you want to be an organizer, you totally can. You can just email recruitment@veggiemijas.org, or you can be part of our creative team. You can be part of any team, and you can just email me, and then we can just find like the right process for you. And then lastly, how you can support us. You can support us by funding us, number one, right? But if you cannot fund us, and that's completely okay, you can also buy our merch that is on veggiemijas.com. And lastly, if you can't do that, you can also, if you have any connections to farmers, brands, restaurants, spaces, etc., send it our way. I think like that is the most key thing that you can do, especially even like as a white ally. Any connections would be so helpful, and sharing the word and following us on Instagram and any social media platforms that we are at. And that's it. Thank you so much, Tahia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for running us through the work, the incredible localized organizing that has expanded across the nation and into your international chapter, running us through the work that you do, how you connect with your communities, and kind of how you've written out your mission. And I open up the Q&A here on YouTube and then also on Zoom. So please feel free to put questions in here directly to Amy and I can help moderate those. And I think at this point, we can probably remove the screen and we can just chat for a little bit. I'm so excited about the ways in which you engage young people in these conversations on food justice, getting them really involved in your localized organizing, and that each chapter is specific to what are the issues happening in that community in Miami with the beaches, or in New York. I mean, something that I see here, and we've talked about this offline of this, but I help run the community fridge in Jackson Heights, where we're from, which is a very working class, multinational neighborhood. And something that we see a lot is a lot of food waste. We see that at the end of the day, grocery stores, restaurants, tons of corporate food waste, and then it ends up in our fridges, or prepared meals that end up in our fridges. How do y'all talk about food waste in your groups?
That's an incredible question. I think that most of the time it has not happened yet in LA or in Chicago. I think Chicago just started, so they haven't had that experience yet. But in LA, I think maybe that's why they also started those weekend drop-ins, because they've been having a lot of that coming in. So they have created like another system in order to do that. But I think that it's something that definitely needs to be talked about, whether that it's like through workshops or having like brochures or something like that, like what to do with your food, specifically for restaurants and like the other companies that are out there that do waste food. Having kind of like a conversation with them and seeing how they can better that, whether that is like adding them into the fridge or even giving them to houseless folks in the area. I think that it's such a much bigger issue than just like yourself, but also having like a true conversation and education with like everyone that is a part of it.
Yeah, I like the way that y'all are thinking about creating educational like brochures of recipes that you can do. Often we see that we get vegetables or materials that a lot of folks don't know how to use. So I think that's great that your education team is thinking about that.
Yeah.
So the way in which we are framing World Environment Day is, again, we condemn the predatory actions of corporations that don't care in their consequences as they're searching for profit, as appropriating natural resources. And ultimately that has to do with capitalism. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on what capitalism has to do with food injustice? In one end, we're fighting for the immediate ends of getting people fed, of having people know about what their food that they're making. And then there's a deeper vision of ending that exploitation. Oh, yeah. So how are y'all talking about that in your chapters?
Yeah. So I think that is also another great question. I think that a lot of people only see the short-term goals instead of also like the long-term goals, especially in our communities. And I think that's for a reason, right? Like I think that when I first became vegan, I thought about all the animals and like my parents' health, right? But then I started getting into deeper education and started thinking about the farm factories and how like they take over most of like the Amazon, and then like we have the people in the farm factories that are mostly folks of color that are immigrants, and they're like in constant threat of getting deportation, and it's just like a whole cycle that you kind of don't think about, right? Because you're already thinking about I don't know, any migration issues that you might have or any issues of like surviving, period. So I think that we really need to have conversations about how food justice really connects with everything, whether that's immigration issues, women's rights, queer rights, all of it, because it's not a separate issue, right? And I think that when we see capitalism and food justice in our collective, yes, we do community fridges. Yes, we do community gardens, but also that education part, going to workshops and teaching these kids that, right? Teaching kids how, these choices that are choices, rather more coincidence, not coincidence, right, of the government. For example, putting like fast food places really close to our neighborhoods, putting bodegas really close to middle schools around, POC schools. These aren't coincidence, and we need to teach kids that. We need to teach the youth and other people, right, adults as well, that food justice is really connected to all issues, and that capitalism just won't stop. Like, they don't care. They don't care if they ruin our Amazon. They don't care if they get rid of indigenous people that live near or are part of the ecosystem. They don't care. So it's up to us, unfortunately, because everything like happens from the ground up. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's the goal of the organizing. And I think it's really powerful for you to share like your political journey too, of like coming into your understanding of, your choice to be plant-based. It could have started in your health and your parents' health and that individual choice. And that is a lot of the narrative right now about veganism, about plant-based lifestyles, but actually it's connected to all of these other issues that we named, capitalism, immigrant rights, and all of that. And, I know that your really each chapter is talking about localized issues, but also your Instagram, your educational programming, you're talking about the role of the US and militarization, how it's leading to food and environmental inequity. You recently had a post about Colombia and how the indigenous Siona people of the Amazon have been in a rigorous fight with the Colombian government to protect their land. Why did you choose to write about that, and what were you bringing up to folks?
yeah, so I want to give credit to the writing editorial content manager, Alejandra Tully, who was the writer of that piece. And folks can find it more on the Veggie Mijas website under Mija articles. And she wrote about Colombia and the environment because, one, I'm Colombian. So I was like, hey, you should write about this. I think it would be super awesome. And she was like, dope, like, let's do it. And she found all of this information that was super important. So currently, right now, the president, well, it didn't pass, but he was trying to put this tax reform process in, and that would create more for essential foods to go up. Like, there was no gas. It was like a whole thing. And since I'm Colombian, I was like in constant communication with my family as well, because it was just a horrible time. And with the people, the indigenous folks, that actually I found out this information by Amazon Frontlines, I believe, on Instagram, and they posted it about it. And I was like, I was so grateful that they did, because I think it's conversations that need to happen as well. The Siona people and also other tribes as well are really near the Coqueta River and in the Amazons. And what this tax reform would do is that they would continue to put aerial spraying through all of the coca plants. And what the coca plants do for the people, it's actually used as medicine for them. But because of like all the narco trafficking, the government really just wants to shut it down. And it's like really messed up, because then that informs like other people, indigenous people, to have health disparities, to leave their lands. Their crops are literally dying. It's just so, it's a very like trickle down effect of what happens, right, when the governments don't care about indigenous people. And even now, the Amazon in that part is is cattle pasture now, and like most of it has been down like 55 miles if the grassland is now dominated by like cows. And it's just all so connected by the way that the crops are literally dying, and now it's like cattle pasture, and they don't care that these coca plants were used for medicine. So you can really see the intersection of what is what is profiting for them, what matters to them versus like what matters to the people. And they're not hearing them out. And right now in Colombia, they actually had a Leticia Pact, I believe it was called. And they didn't even include indigenous people within that pact. So while they were reading it, like everybody was like, oh yes, like so excited that this is finally like happening for indigenous people. They were like, we weren't even included. Like we didn't even read it. Like, how do you know that this like would benefit us? And it's just a lot. It's a lot. And most of the time, indigenous people aren't even in these conversations. So that's what's happening right now.
Thank you for sharing that, Amy, and that context. And I'm really glad that your group is ensuring that you have that international perspective paired with the local organizing. And at the People's Forum, we're an internationalist space. So we have a couple of conversations we've had with organizers on the ground that I can link into the chat a little bit later on the state repression in Colombia. And we're going to have a conversation later today between Zoe of People's Dispatch, which is a journalist space for people's movements, and Carlos Marentes from the Border Agricultural Workers Project. And they're going to have a live interview. And it's going to touch a lot, I think, on what we're talking today and give a deeper analysis there. So I'm excited. We have a question in the Q&A from Evelyn. So the plant-based cooking teach-ins that the education team is doing at supermarkets sounds really incredible. And I love that y'all are centering meeting people where they're at and making plant-based cooking accessible. Yeah, could you talk more about what those teach-ins look like?
Yeah, so we're actually just creating them. Like I said, the education team is really new in the sense of creating, meeting people where they're at. So I think like what they would look like to me is that we would have partnerships with supermarkets, and we can create kind of like a list of what that would look like. And I would want it to be supermarkets that, that my family has gone to, that their family has gone to, just like supermarkets that are for like from the organizers themselves, and kind of set up like late hours where a lot of folks come in and like are really quick within that run. I don't see the teach-ins being like more than like 10 minutes, maybe like highlighting a fruit or a vegetable and seeing like giving them like three quick recipes that they can make and giving them that information. I think that not only would this go for adults, but also youth, because sometimes like youth stay home. Like I know that as a kid, I would stay home a lot, like because my parents were working a lot. So I would come home and like there would be nobody home. So I think like giving also like brochures to kids and like knowing that they can also cook these things as well is like really important too. So I'm seeing kind of like really quick, because that's how quick my parents would go into the grocery shop to like come right out and not be something so explicit. But because we'd be there so often, the same people would come in and we would have this like partnership with them. And if they have any questions related to, what plant-based recipes can look like, and if they would want more, we would be that person to give them that information. So that's kind of what I see those teach-ins in the supermarkets to look like.
That's awesome. That's a really creative idea of engaging the folks in your chapters with the community. I do have a question about what the demographics of your chapters are in terms of age, and how, I don't know, is it more of a young youth group? And then how is that information that you're learning, you're talking about, the political education that you're doing, how's it disseminated to folks multi-generationally, to our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, our older folks who are working class, who are laborers, vendors, cashiers, all that stuff? How are you disseminating that information across?
Yeah. That is such a great question. So actually, I remember when we were having New York City events and a lot of people would come in, it would be like they're like people that are my age with their parents that would come to events. So it was just like it's a very intergenerational, like you said, it's a lot of different ages and in groups, and especially also with like teach-ins. Like for example, like we've done like yoga events, and there would be a lot of like different age groups as well. Something that we talk a lot about is that a lot of the organizers, they obviously weren't raised plant-based, right? So we would talk about our kind of like our transition into that and how like it has affected our parents. And a lot of the times, like our parents now are either mostly plant-based or they have like knowledge of plant-based recipes and they do that themselves. Some parents don't engage at all, and that's like completely fine. But most of the time they are like curious, right? And even my mom, like she was so curious when I like transitioned into plant-based recipes, that she started creating her own plant-based recipes through YouTube. She learned from like this like woman in Spanish, like learning how to make vegan recipes, and now she's like all over it. But my mom even wanted to be like, I want to start like a veggie mamas like chapter, whatever, where like all the moms get together and like teach plant-based recipes, or even like just like talking about it. So I think, and I know that a lot of other moms want to be part of that too, especially like the moms of the organizers, right? So I think like that is so cool that there's so much interest there of like, the parents and like us like teaching them. And it has been truly like a cycle of that. And we have seen that through spreading the word. So for example, like in my personal level, like when I told my parents about being plant-based, they were calling everybody Tahia. They were like, oh my God, you have to try this, like blah, blah. And I remember specifically one year we went to like a bunch of barbecues, and my dad would literally just sit there and tell everybody off about about cattle pastures and all of the things that are corrupted. And you can see that these people are really interested, right? I'm not saying that they're going to be eating like plant-based meals every day, but at least they have that knowledge now. And I think it's so important that it literally just spreads out organically.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I love the power that folks build within themselves to be able to want to continue organizing beyond that. I'm so curious. So what are some of the movements either here in the US or internationally that you draw inspiration from as you built this collective and you have these powerful conversations internally?
Yeah. Honestly, like I said, this isn't something that I thought about. I didn't like wake up one day and I was like, I'm going to fight for food justice. Like it was literally just organic. And I think that those are sometimes like the best ways to do it. I think that I'm an activist, not by like choice, but out of necessity. Um, and I don't have any like certain political issues that like really draw me. I think what draws me is the people and their people's stories. Um, whether that is here in the US with like my friends in different parts of the cities, or whether that is like internationally with my family in Colombia or in Peru. So I think I'm really just drawn to the people and their stories and what they have gone through, and not necessarily like an aspect of that, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, I understand. Um, and a lot of our struggles are interconnected, whether that be the defense of land or um, fighting with pipelines and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, even now, like I know that in Astoria, I just like learned a lot about all of this, but in Astoria right now, they're fighting against like a power plant that is going to be using fracking gas, natural gases, and Astoria even has like it's nicknamed Asthma Alley because like the asthma is higher than average in Astoria, and you're from Jackson Heights, it's like literally like 10 minutes away from. So I went to middle school in Astoria. I've gone to the Astoria Park. Like I've done that whole 9 yards. So for me, learning about that has been so like wild because, you know, like that's literally our home. Like that's literally our home, and they're putting these things in our neighborhoods when A, they could have used other alternatives, and B, why are they sacrificing us, right? It's always that they sacrifice Black and brown people. You're not going to see those kinds of machines in white neighborhoods, right? So I think what really draws me is my home and what we're advocating for and what needs to change in my area. I think like that's what really draws me.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And I feel like, for me as well, a lot of my organizing started super localized in Queens and Jackson Heights. And I do feel like as you start organizing locally, you really see how so much of what our communities are facing, it's in our areas, but it's also in the Appalachian South, in white working class communities. It's in what the indigenous folks of the Amazon are fighting against. It's in like so many of the struggles, like in Palestine, and ultimately, like what I'm always thinking about is what is that string of solidarity between all of our oppression, um, and I'm inspired by the really localized work that you guys are doing because that sparks imagination for the youth and to keep studying and to keep learning. I actually think it's a plug for us. I want to say we have the Revolutionary Summer School at the People's Forum starting up this summer. It is a place for organizers, visionaries, people who want to build movements to learn deeper on the theory and struggles around the world. It starts on June 22nd, and I would love for you to share it out with your crew, Veggie Mijas. I think people would be really excited to hear from their experiences and also to learn a little deeper on the theory and the struggles that are across all of our work and to build it. I'm gonna put that in the chat as well. And I want to put it out. Is there anything in the YouTube or anything else in the Q&A that people want to bring up for Amy here? Awesome. Cool. Amy, is there anything else you wanted to bring up today in our conversation?
Well, I want to kind of hear about you, Tahia, like how you started organizing. And I think like, yeah, I just want to hear more about your work as well. I think it really intersects with ours.
Oh yeah, with Veggie Mijas. Yeah, I could talk a little bit about, I guess, even during the pandemic, putting up the Jackson Heights community fridge is one of those things where, as you know, for folks who are tuning in internationally and from around the nation, Queens, which is one of the most diverse particularly Jackson Heights, Elmer, one of the most diverse zip codes in the nation, became the epicenter of the crisis, which I think is pretty clear as a working class community, as quote unquote essential workers. So as folks were starting to work from home and things were canceled, it was our communities, the cab drivers, the vendors, the laborers, construction workers, teachers, cashiers who were still going into work every single day, who were still commuting, who were beholden by the ruling class to keep working, but then applauded at 7 p.m. So as folks were going into work, food inequity just got stronger, and we could see folks were having trouble making ends meet. Folks were losing jobs. Unemployment was running out. Unemployment wasn't hitting our undocumented folks. So a group of organizers decided to put up a community fridge as a result of other fridges that came up throughout New York City and around the nation. And then it really became a place of solidarity for folks to fill the fridges. We have really good conversations at the fridge about like why Why is there a lack of food? Why are our communities receiving prepared meals, or elderly folks receiving prepared meals that are rotten, that are moldy? What does that mean for them? We learn a lot about senior folks who need the prepared meals because they have trouble cooking. We've learned about families who live in multi-families in one apartment unit, and so a lot of conversations. Yeah, so that's that's a little bit about the Jackson Heights work, but I think it does relate to Veggie
You're
Mijas.
awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, uh, and just particularly our communities, I think, is a reflection of some of the other struggles going on in the world.
Right.
Um, and I think one other beautiful part I'll bring up is because it is a very diverse community, our fridge at any given time can be filled with Kerala from India, which is a very bitter gourd. It could be filled with Bengali squash, which is called lau, that a lot of people grow in their backyards. And it can also be filled with plátanos, and it's filled with cassava and yuca. Like at any given time, it has all of those things.
Gosh,
It's a good way to just have a little physical reflection of the diversity of our neighborhood.
so
It's
beautiful.
pretty cool. I like it. Um, awesome. Well, I think we're getting to the end of our conversation here. I am so grateful for you for sharing Veggie Mijas's work. I think you guys are doing some really rad stuff, and I'm excited to see it to continue to grow and the deeper conversations you guys have. Um, I'm excited that y'all talk about capitalism and imperialism and US militarization and its role in food injustice and its role in destroying indigenous communities in our lands. And that's the mission we want to walk out with on World Environment Day. So keep it up. I'm excited to
Thank you
see
so
more.
much, Tahia. You're the best. Thank you so much for having me and for having this dialogue with me. Super important. And thank you for the work that you do as well. I think it's all part of the bigger picture.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. And we will talk soon.